For years, electric vehicles were hailed as the inevitable future of transportation in the United States. Automakers poured billions into research, battery plants, and flashy product launches. Federal incentives, ambitious regulations, and consumer excitement created a sense that the transition away from gasoline was unstoppable. But now the mood has shifted. Headlines suggest it's game over for U.S. EV makers. Plants are slowing, incentives are vanishing, and demand appears to be softening. Yet the real story is more complex. Rather than a sudden collapse, the industry is entering a turbulent period of retrenchment and recalibration. The changing landscape. The most immediate challenge facing U.S. EV manufacturers is the decline of government support. For years, federal tax credits helped offset the higher upfront costs of EVs. Buyers could count on up to $7,500 in savings, a significant incentive that kept demand flowing even as prices remained higher than comparable gasoline cars. That credit, however, is being phased out, with a hard deadline looming. Once it disappears, the industry loses one of its strongest levers for growth. At the same time, major automakers are revisiting their production strategies. Factories that were supposed to be humming at full capacity are instead cutting shifts, delaying expansions, or pausing production altogether. These aren't symbolic moves. They represent real cracks in the optimism that once surrounded the U.S. EV push. Underlying these developments is uncertainty in policy. Ambitious emissions rules and state-level mandates that once promised to force a rapid shift toward electrification are facing resistance. The regulatory environment that once seemed a tailwind now looks more like a patchwork of mixed signals. For automakers that plan production years in advance, such uncertainty is crippling. Signs of retrenchment. When we look at the industry today, the most striking feature is not collapse but scaling back. Several U.S. automakers that once promised a swift all-electric future are now tempering expectations. Plans to eliminate internal combustion engines have quietly stretched out over decades rather than years. Instead of betting everything on EVs, many companies are rebalancing portfolios to include hybrids and improved gasoline models. Startups that rode the EV wave are also facing tough choices. Once darlings of Wall Street, their valuations have fallen and their cash reserves are thinning. Layoffs and cost-cutting measures signal just how difficult it is to survive in a landscape where capital is more cautious and buyers are less enthusiastic. For many of these newer players, the dream of becoming the next Tesla has faded into the reality of survival mode. Even Tesla itself, the undisputed leader of the EV revolution in America, is facing headwinds. Market share has slipped from near dominance to a much smaller slice as traditional automakers finally field their own EVs. At the same time, the company is grappling with pricing pressure, softening demand, and a consumer base that no longer sees EVs as rare status symbols, but as just another option on the dealer lot. Why game over isn't the whole story. Despite the doom and gloom, it's important to step back and remember that the EV story is not ending. It's evolving. While incentives are fading and some factories are idling, the U.S. has already built significant momentum that won't evaporate overnight. EVs now account for a sizable portion of new car sales, and in some regions, they become part of the mainstream. Charging networks continue to expand, making ownership more practical for millions. Battery technology is improving, with cost per kilowatt-hour falling and performance increasing year after year. The barriers that once made EVs impractical are steadily being dismantled. Just as important, the global market is moving full steam ahead. Europe and China continue to push aggressively toward electrification, shaping the global supply chains and technological innovations that U.S. automakers cannot afford to ignore. To retreat too far would be to risk being left behind in the most important automotive shift since the invention of the assembly line. The road ahead. If it's not game over, then what comes next? The answer is turbulence. The U.S. EV industry is about to enter a period of shakeout where only the strongest, smartest, and most adaptable players will thrive. We can expect production to slow in the short term, with companies becoming far more selective about which models to launch and where to invest. High-margin luxury EVs and fleet vehicles may take precedence over mass-market options, at least until costs come down further. Hybrids and plug-in hybrids will likely regain importance as a bridge technology that appeals to cost-conscious buyers while still meeting emissions goals. Pricing will be the battleground. Without hefty tax credits, EVs will need to compete more directly on cost. This puts enormous pressure on manufacturers to reduce expenses across the supply chain, from raw materials to assembly. Companies that can crack the code on cheaper batteries or more efficient manufacturing will have a decisive edge. Policy will also play a decisive role. While federal support is retreating, states may step in with their own measures to encourage electrification. Cities may implement new rules on emissions or expand charging infrastructure. Political shifts in Washington could revive federal support in future years, just as quickly as current programs are being phased out. Automakers know this, which is why they are cautious but not abandoning their EV ambitions. And then there's innovation. Even in challenging times, research and development continue. Advances in solid-state batteries, fast charging, and new materials promise to lower costs and extend range. These are not theoretical breakthroughs, but technologies already moving from labs to pilot programs. Once they hit scale, the economics of EVs will look radically different and more competitive with gasoline. A historical perspective. To understand what's happening today, it helps to look back. The auto industry has weathered waves of change before. From the transition to automatic transmissions, to the oil shocks of the 1970s, to the rise of SUVs in the 1990s, consumer preferences and regulatory pressures have repeatedly forced companies to adapt. Rarely has the story been linear or smooth. In many ways, what we're seeing now is a classic adjustment cycle. The early surge of enthusiasm, fueled by subsidies and innovation, created inflated expectations. Now the industry is grappling with the reality of scaling up, managing costs, and appealing to mainstream buyers. If history is any guide, the companies that survive this correction will emerge stronger and more sustainable in the long run. Conclusion: game-changing, not game over. So is it game over for US EV makers? The answer is no. What we are witnessing is not the end, but a shift. From rapid growth fueled by policy and optimism to a more challenging phase where real-world economics take center stage. Some players will fall behind. Some factories will close. Headlines will continue to warn of decline. But at the same time, the foundation for electrification has already been laid, and the global momentum is too strong to ignore. The US EV industry is entering its most difficult test yet, but difficult tests do not spell final defeat. They separate the visionaries from the vulnerable, the innovators from the imitators. Far from being over, the game is changing, and those who adapt will define the next chapter. If you want to stay informed on the future of EVs, the shifting strategies of automakers, and how these changes affect the cars we drive, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the latest updates.